Hi folks, you're listening to the Paranormal Peep Show with myself, Andy Chaplin, and Neil Geddes-Ward. Neil, how are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm actually now in the throes of springtime. Well, the mists of spring, I think, are in the air. Got through the doldrums of the winter, and I think the mists of spring are starting to wake up, and hopeful signs of spring are coming forward. What about you?
Well, as you can see, I'm in my special crystal shop that I've set
Mm.
up behind me with all my bizarre lamps and crystals and God knows what else to put me on another kind of vibration of higher consciousness, I think.
Is it working?
No,
Nah.
not
I think
really.
you need to. Don't you have to charge all these crystals or something?
I
In
think
the
I have to
moonlight.
kind of flush out and realign my chakras or something.
Yeah, yeah. I actually slept with once a quartz crystal under my pillow once,
What was the
many, many
name?
years ago. Yeah. She was hard as quartz crystal. It actually gave me a headache,
Did
which
it?
is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the pillow being uncomfortable. It literally was something coming out of this crystal that gave me a headache the next
That's
day.
interesting. So was it a clear quartz crystal?
It was just a pinky crystal. It didn't seem to be clear. It's sort of milky, murky crystal
Okay, so
color.
if it's a pinky one, that would be a rose quartz
Rose quartz,
crystal.
yeah.
I actually heard that rose quartz is supposed to be kind of like to protect you health wise, kind of like and kind of increase kind of spiritual protection. I could be wrong with that, but also there's a I think they call it a white quartz or a clear quartz, which is supposed to heighten psychic awareness. Now, I actually had one of these that I was using as kind of like a pendulum for dowsing because I first got into the psychic thing by using a dowsing pendulum with playing cards. So I'd have like five playing cards, like four of them be red and one of them would be like an ace of spades or something. I'd shuffle them up until I lose track completely, and then kind of use this pendulum to kind of find the right one. Interestingly, it had quite a high hit rate. I was getting it right, or the crystal was getting it right quite a lot, which is really interesting. So I thought, what would happen if I took this crystal and put it under my pillow for nighttime? Would it increase my psychic awareness? What actually ended up happening is I started getting spirit coming into my dreams, but
Whoa.
not in a particularly good way. It was a bit kind of, it was psychic, but it felt like they were invading, and there was some kind of not quite nice energies with that. So I thought, maybe not do that anymore. So stopped it.
Interesting.
Mm,
Interesting. Yeah, because you're meant to cleanse all these crystals in moonlight and stuff in salt water or something like that. I mean, I'm not a
yeah,
crystal expert,
yeah.
but these are the things I hear. And I always doubted their ability, but then I started to think about it and I thought, well, hang on a minute. You get crystals in radios, and then you get
Mm.
quartz crystal digital watches and things like that.
And
Um,
lasers as well.
lasers as well, yeah. So they obviously
Yeah.
have some use, even if it's not quite the use that, the mystics will assign to them, maybe, but there's
Well,
obviously something.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if you take the scientific kind of view, why do they use crystals for radios? It's to do with like wavelength and frequency. Well, what do psychics talk about?
Yeah,
Vibrations,
absolutely.
wavelengths. It's
Yeah.
and the same
Although,
with lasers as well. So lasers, you got crystal lasers and you've got gas lasers. So I think I'm right in saying the crystal lasers came first, and it was ruby crystals that they used first of all. But they couldn't use glass and they couldn't use anything else at that point. It had to be a crystal ruby. So why that? Again,
hmm.
it's down to there have to be a certain frequency that it just wouldn't work without it. So
I was
fascinating.
told by this channel medium, oh, going back many, many years ago now, probably about 35 years ago. Crikey, does time fly? And he did this reading on me, and he said that in a previous lifetime, I was some guy in Egypt that worked with crystals, and I always remember that. I, there's no way I can prove it, but I just thought it was quite an interesting thing. By the way, I don't know if you caught that Netflix series, have you? It's called The Surviving Death, and it's on Netflix.
It sounds interesting, but I'm not on Netflix because I don't like paedophilia. And
Oh, right.
after the whole cuties thing, nah, sorry, not
Yeah.
for me.
No, I actually never saw any reference to that at all during my. I mean, I'm still on Netflix. I never, because normally they say about all that sort of stuff, and I never saw it at all. So they must have pulled the show straight off as soon as it got into trouble of some sort. So,
I thought they were still endorsing it and not apologizing for
oh,
it.
really? See, I've never
Yeah,
even seen it come up on my, you know, interest to search. But I
yeah.
did get this show called Surviving Death, which I've only watched three. I must catch the rest up. But some of it's very interesting. It's written by Leslie Keane, presented by, well, sort of semi-hosted by Leslie Keane, who is the UFO research journalist who was
Mm.
involved in the Nimitz stuff going on the Washington Times
Okay.
information. So she was more of a UFO person. So for her to now be talking about life after death, she's suddenly changed her approach. Not that she's not into UFOs still, I think she is, but she suddenly had this experience with someone dying, decided to investigate life after death, and out of that came a book, Surviving Death, and
Mm.
now this series on Netflix. But there was this in the third episode or fourth episode, there's this Dutch lady who is a physical medium, and she works from a place in Holland, but they did bring her to America, I think, or the Americans went over there. I'm not quite sure which. And there's a whole family of them, and she met them in the day and gave her, a little spiel about what she does. And she was introduced to all the different members of the family. And then later on that night, about 4 or 5 hours later, she's in her little trance cabinet and she starts producing her funny voices. And one of them was this little boy called Johnny from the other side. Johnny Boy, he was called.
Yeah.
And she talks like that. Hello, it's Johnny Boy. And me and my girlfriend, well, I mean, we just
That's when
couldn't
you
stop
lose it.
laughing. Yeah. And of course, all the information that she was giving these members of the family. Oh yeah, you like cars, and you're involved with fish, aren't you? And you hang them up, and they were going, my God, that's true. I work at a restaurant where we do hang them up, and yeah, I do like cars. And of course, they all realised later on that that was all information that was on his Facebook, And so during the introduction meeting where she's introduced them, she got all their names and then
Yeah.
managed to then fish around on the internet for maybe 2 hours or
Yeah.
something, and mentally remembered all this information to give out. It was all very vague stuff that could be found.
Have you? There's two things I want to say. First of all, on the UFO thing, Neil, have you heard about apparently the CIA have something like 180 days to release everything that they've got on UFOs? Have you heard about that?
Is this something to do with one of the last Trump things that
I
was?
think it could be.
Yeah, I heard that. That's interesting.
But basically, they've got to release everything. So,
Wow.
But what I'm expecting, I'll tell you what I'm expecting. I expect they'll release loads and loads of documents with massive black lines through everything.
Yeah.
So you just get like a PDF of like 125,000 different pages just for one category, and it'll just be black lines with maybe kind of like you can read the in it, The other thing I was going to say, have you heard of I think it was a term in the Second World War, a blue dye, I think that's what they call it, a blue dye thing. So if they've got like a spy that they think is a double agent is giving away information that they don't want given away, but they need to find out who it is, they will give different information to different people, and some of it will be true, some of it will be false. Right. And the person that kind of like gives the false information, that it's almost like a dye, which is why they call it blue dye, as in kind of like ink dye. You find out who the person is, who's the leak, the mole, through the information that they've given. And then you can track them back that way. So apparently they did this in kind of like not exactly a ghost show, but a mediumistic show, probably a few years ago now. And it's interesting you're talking about like this false medium kind of like looking up things on Facebook. What they did in this TV show, I think it was on Channel 4, might have been ITV. They got these, I think it was about 5 mediums. They brought them into a factory and they made up this story about it being a chocolate factory. You can see where this is going, right? So they had this kind of like, they alluded to Willy Wonka and the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but didn't quite go that far. But they had kind of paintings of kind of like the owner of the chocolate factory, and mediums, except one, all of them started regurgitating, oh yes, I'm getting things about sweets and chocolates and confectionery, and at the end of the show, basically the host of the show said, look, this isn't this actually was like a steel works, it's never been a chocolate factory. The painting on the wall is quite a modern one that we created to make look old. All the information you've given us is actually off a website that we've given out online just to see, and this is kind of like a blue dye process. This is the link with the blue dye, and they basically all got uncovered as frauds, these 4 meetings, except for one, and I think his name is Kevin Wade, and he's actually been on the psychic circuit, and I've met Kevin. I think he's a decent guy actually, and he when he was going around this chocolate factory, he said, I'm not really getting anything, I'm not really picking up, he mentioned nothing to do with the chocolate factory. So obviously he didn't go on the website, and the others did. Now, what really annoys me about that is it then kind of tarnishes all other psychics and all other mediums. And that's quite annoying, because our job is hard enough as it is, without kind of skeptics and kind of people running up against us in that way. But for kind of people to just jump on the bandwagon, oh, I'm a medium now, and then just kind of troll things on Facebook and websites, is bad, very, very bad.
Well, the interesting thing is that this Dutch medium said at the beginning of the program that physical mediumship has been tarnished by fraud, and so this is why we have to unfortunately take all these precautions, like tying ourselves in chairs and strapped in and stuff like that, to show that we're not doing fraud. And yet later on, she was the one that was doing fraud, well, alleged fraud, should I say, by looking these things up on Facebook.
It doesn't help, does it? I mean, Colin Fry got busted as well, and he said, "Oh, the spirits took me over," when I think he grabbed a trumpet and played it and then put it back down on the table in the dark so people couldn't see it.
That was when he was channeling the ghost of Roy Castle, wasn't it?
It's just very, very annoying. And in fact, there's a friend of mine, Ashley. Actually, we've interviewed him, Ashley Darkwood. You know Ashley?
Ashley, yeah, I was in a circle with him.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So you do know. Yeah. Basically, he's been on a TV show in America recently. I think it's called something like Unexplained, or TV's most unexplained paranormal things. And he's actually talking about fraudulent mediums and fraudulent mediumship. Now he runs a spiritual circle himself, so he's not anti-psychics and anti-spiritual people. It's just that he's just as pissed off as I am that there are people out there doing this kind of thing, because it does ourselves no favors whatsoever, and it gives fantastic ammunition for people to sit back, the James Randys, etc., even though he's passed on, but whoever takes his place, to just say, oh no, it's all a load of rubbish, they will make it up, it's all just fraudulent. And yeah, that's annoying. It's very annoying.
Getting back to the UFO thing briefly, then we'll get to our guest. Also, they've been the FBI or the CIA have been told to release all those files of UFOs. Well, didn't they change the name of UFOs to unidentified aerial phenomena?
That's interesting. No.
So in other words, they'll say, well, of course you can have all the files on UFOs, and they haven't got them, or not many of them, because they've all relabeled the file name. So they kind of.
Yeah, it's wranglings and legalese, and kind of it's court stuff, isn't it? How lawyers twist words.
Yeah. Relabel it and hide it, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Anyway, as I mentioned, we do have a guest, so I think it's about time we brought them on to discuss everything not UFOs and everything not fake psychics, I hope. So we do have our guest, which is Mark Anthony Wyatt, who heralds from Cornwall. Are you there, Mark?
Hi, Neil.
Oh, we do. Here he is. How are you?
Voice, but we don't have video. We have video.
We have video as well, for those that are watching on YouTube. How are you, Mark?
I'm fine, thank you, Neil. And you?
Yep, we're very well, thank you. Very well.
You, Andrew?
Yep, pretty good.
I was just listening to your conversation. I could quite happily just sit here and listen to you, actually. So if you hear sort of like sniffing and snoring, that's just me sitting here getting comfortable. But
our viewers were quite bored of listening just to me and Neil constantly.
No, actually, I learned quite a lot, actually, and I've got one tiny thing to add, which is the death that Leslie Keane was so affected by was Bud Hopkins.
She did mention that in the program.
Yeah,
they had a few clips of that.
She was with him when he died.
Yes,
and she said it was like a life-changing moment for her, because he just dropped dead while she was with him.
Bud Hopkins was he did regression hypnosis or something on UFO experiences or something like that, abduction people. Yeah.
And didn't he get? Oh no, obviously it wasn't him. I'm trying to think. Who was the one that was hit by a car?
That was another guy that did kind of thing. John Mack, I think. Yeah. He was the one that flew to South Africa and interviewed all the kids that saw a landed craft in South Africa, I believe, witnessed by all these school kids. If it's the one I'm thinking of, John Mack, and he was hit by a car in London, which, a bit strange, isn't it?
There is a guy, actually, who's just, I sort of vaguely know of him. I don't know if you've heard of him, Preston Dennett.
The name rings a bell.
Yeah, he's done a lot of work on sightings to massive amounts of children at schools. He's just brought out a book on that. So he might be somebody for the future that you might want to have a chat to.
You. Yeah, I know there was a big sighting in Australia back in the 60s, I think it was. And even now they're all grown up, they still maintain that what they saw was what they saw,
Yeah.
It's interesting. All these people that try and say no, you didn't see it, but they weren't there. You know, these people were
that's
there.
right.
And they know what they saw. You know.
Exactly.
So now, Mark, we won't be talking about UFOs. Well, we obviously have been talking about UFOs, but your main interest.
We can do. I mean, my books cover lots of UFO
We'll talk about
experiences
UFOs if you want. Yeah. Well, whatever you cover, we'll talk about then. So you're the author of a few books. So what's the books you've authored?
I began about 5 years ago. Well, I did a lot of before I got writing about the paranormal. I was writing sort of dark comedy sort of stuff and nostalgic sort of stuff from my youth, and then around about 2015, I thought I'd jot down all of my paranormal experiences just for my own benefit and perhaps for my kids, for one day when I'm gone. And it was just like an exercise really in sort of almost like coming out almost, like, yeah, this actually happened and I'm not ashamed of it. Just deal with it, and also to sort of put it behind me once I've got it all written down. So I called that first one Wyatt's Weird World. And that I've temporarily taken it down because I remembered a few other bits and pieces and had more information on one of the experiences. So I'm currently updating that one, and I'm hoping to get that out again maybe within 2 or 3 weeks.
Is your website www.www.com?
It was, but I don't use the website now. I just found it a bit of a time waster, really. But yeah, it was. But then about 2 years ago, well, I've been working on these for about 4 years. Let's see if I can find. I wrote The Spirit of Cornwall, a Haunted Legacy, volumes 1 and volume 2. There you go.
Yeah.
And I did everything, and I mean literally everything in there. I even did the covers for photographs of my own, and but it's not just a list of. Okay, so it was originally intended to be a collection of other people's experiences because the first book was just mine.
Mm-hmm.
So these 2 books are just other people's experiences, or they were meant to be. Although there's 2 or 3 experiences in there which were mine, which were sort of added at a later date. Basically, I was told, you really need to put these stories in there. We can perhaps get to that later. So they're more than just a list of paranormal. They're not just another random collection of ghost, UFO, and so on stories. There's like a theme that runs between it, and it's all to do with the nature of Cornwall itself. So there's a bit of everything in there. There's a little bit of science, quantum physics comes into it. We've got a lot of literature and sort of esoteric stuff really that sort of ties in. Crowley gets a mention occasionally because of one of the experiences, one of the stories. So it's a collection of experiences of other people, UFOs on the North Coast and also right down St Ives area. There's too much to sort of just list it all without going through the chapters, but there is a theme going through it. So it's written in a way that literally every line I took a lot of care with and went back over and over and over to make it flow and make things fit together better so that it wasn't just somebody gives you a story and they write it down and it's just jumbled up, just notes and I basically make that more interesting for the reader. That's my sort of super skill, I think, if I've got one. So yeah, I mean, would you like me to talk about any of the
before we talk about some of the ghostly tales in there, how did you become interested in all this? Because I know that you're a musician way back, going into folk music and stuff.
Amateur musician. Really. I mean,
so was it the folk tales of Cornwall that started to stir your interest and it went more into the ghostly thing?
Well, indirectly, I suppose that was part of it. I when I was very, very young, I was literally, well, between 0 and 18 months. We can't get an exact date on that. My father had an experience, and we lived, I should explain. So we lived in Surrey, and we were in a very wooded, beautiful, hilly area with a stream and woods and so on, where there was an old gunpowder works. And although I was born in the nearby town of Guildford, I was raised in a haunted gunpowder works. I mean, obviously, I didn't know that at the time.
How old was it?
This was 1960. I was born in March of 1960, and I was there for 18 months.
Gunpowder works.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that goes back to 16. I haven't sort of looked at this recently, but I think it was about 1620 something. Wow. And it was eventually went out of use in about 1919. I think it was just after the First World War. And there were what they did when the factory went out of use just after the First World War. It just was left to sort of rot, really, to decay. And eventually they put some. They got the magazine buildings, which had extremely thick walls to protect people from blasts. And they turned them into cottages, and various other buildings were turned into dwellings, to families to live in. And the local council were renting these places out to people who at that stage couldn't afford houses. And that's how I ended up living there as a baby. Now, I've only got the one memory of actually living there. But my father was at the time, he was a steam engine fireman on the Southern Railway. And he used to have to go to work at odd times, as they do, these railmen and posties and all that. So he would go out all hours of the night and morning and come back at odd hours as well in the dark. And he was sort of working there for, well, when we were living there, I'm trying to think now. They were there obviously before I was born for like about 5 or 6 years, I think. So in all that time, he only had the one really odd experience. And when I heard about that experience, because it was actually, you hear people say, oh, well, these experiences tend not to be frightening. I mean, in my experience, that's true. None of my experiences have ever been frightening, really. But in my father's experience, his was pretty scary. And I eventually heard about that when I was probably about 8 or 9. It was just in the family. It would occasionally get mentioned. And my dad hardly ever mentioned it, probably 2 or 3 times at most. But my mum would mention it occasionally, and he would just leave the room or just hush, But that story just got to me, and I thought, wow, this is fascinating stuff, So I started. I was an avid reader. I was always reading, mostly about Cornwall and spooky stuff. That's how I originally started when I was reading. So I started collecting all this, the Cornish folk tales and so on. So that's where it comes into what you said. It is sort of accurate. The stories about Lyonesse, or Lioness, however you want to say it, the city of lions, which was under the sea at the end of Land's End in Cornwall. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the stories that just really pulled me in, because the fishermen, and I actually do mention that in this book, the fishermen on certain clear days could see down through the water, and they claimed they could see church towers. Mm. Now, they would also, when the nets were out, they would bring in old pieces of buildings, like just stones off of buildings and stuff, and various bits of iron and what have you, So in my book, in this, I think it's the second one, this one, I sort of go into a bit more detail on that, and I tried to track down when that, because the land, I'm going off on a tangent here, but the land of Lyonesse was drowned by probably a tsunami, and I haven't looked at this recently, but there was about 3 different candidates for which one it could be. People talk about the flood, the biblical flood. Then you had one shortly after the Norman invasion. There was another one. and there was another one as well. So I mean, it could have been any one, but when you tie it all together and you look at, there was supposed to have been a lot of churches flooded. Well, straight away that counts out anything sort of pre-Jesus. So that sort of narrows it down. So basically, I did a lot of detective work on that. So it's all in the book, and sort of I think it happened around about sort of Arthurian times.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't go into King Arthur in these books, but King Arthur, from what I can gather, I've dug into that a bit. There was more than one.
I've heard that as well. Yeah,
because the years, the span that the stories are there. That no one man's going to live that long. So So anyway, sorry, I've gone completely off on a
your
tangent.
father's experience, I'm really intrigued about.
Okay. Well, again, obviously it's secondhand. So what happened to him? He was I'll try and set the scene a bit. So we lived in this old factory, as I say, on the side of a fast-flowing stream. And it's got all the relevant wood around that you would need. I think it's alder, but you would need to make gunpowder. So it's a very dense place. You're sort of living in amongst the woods. And it's very, very rural. I mean, extremely rural. Now, this was like sometime between well, I suppose could be like late 50s on to, trying to think, halfway through 1960. Because at that point we moved. So I know it didn't happen after that. He was, as I say, he was a steam engine fireman. He was coming home from work sometime around, I think, about 4:00 in the morning. Got quite close to home, and he was just cycling along, and he notices that something is following him. And again, this is so long since I've even looked at this, but his experience was that he went past. No, sorry, I got it wrong. He went past the guy. It was illuminated, but he thought that was just like the lights of a bike or something. As he went around this thing, he went to talk to this man. He thought it was a man cycling, middle of nowhere, dark, and he went to tell him that he had no lights on or something like this, because he didn't realize there was anything odd about it, really. And this character on the bike evidently had no face. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but that is what. Now, he came back, and we only had this from my mother. So, because he would never talk about it, hardly ever. So my mum said he came in to this little house that we had back in those days, slammed the door, and basically just slipped down on the inside and just up against the door, and just could not speak for a long time. Every time he tried to speak, it was just like he was shaking.
Crikey.
He was really badly affected by it. Now, when I put all this down, I mean, my memory on it is very, very vague, because I put all this down in my first book 5 years ago, and I've done a lot in the last 5 years. But when I wrote it all down and I got all the history to try and find out a bit more about the actual history of the site, there were no other stories from anyone else. I could not find anybody who had a similar story from the same area. Then I think it was about 2 years ago, I joined a club on a Facebook group. It's probably more than 2 years ago now, which was from that area, just on the edge of Guildford. And somebody contacted me and said, "Mark, you should look on there. There's people talking about ghosts at the old gunpowder works." So I jumped on it straight away to see what people were saying. And people were coming out of the woodwork saying, "Well, this happened and that happened." So, which is one of the reasons why I took the first book off, because I've actually got.
I see. Yeah.
One of the guys who's got an experience that he had at that old factory, who I didn't even know at the time I wrote this first book. He actually lives in Czechoslovakia now, and weirdly, through this story, he's become a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And he's had other strange experiences too. So I we'll be meeting him to get his story and sort of weaving it into the narrative, because it sort of backs up things that my dad said. Peep, one of the, I should explain. So you've got this old factory in the woods and a stream running through it, and all these old relic. Now English Heritage have it, and they've tidied it up a little bit too much, really. It's, like when they take away the magic and mystery of a place, it's all smart and tidy. They've cut all the ivy and
it's all been processed.
It's just not for me. I mean, I preferred it as it was, just very mysterious, But just along a short footpath, there's a pub called the Percy Arms, which is a really good little pub. And the Percy Arms used to be used all this stuff my dad did not know when he had his experience. I mean, he wasn't interested. He was never interested in this spooky stuff, he just wouldn't really talk about it. But in digging into that story 5 years ago, I found out so much about the place. And the Percy Arms pub, which is probably, a couple of thousand yards away from the site, they used the cellar to store dead bodies after explosions at the factory, which happened frequently.
Don't order the pies at the Percy pub then.
Right. Definitely, yeah. So the stories, which when you start delving into the history of the works, when these blasts went off, it could be a little thing like somebody, like they used to have the hobnail boots, and they'd set a spark off, and that would get into maybe a barge on the river with the gunpowder in, and that would go, So they would find, and it's a bit gory, but they would find bits of people in the trees, and literally hundreds of yards away, on rooftops and stuff. They'd still be finding. That's how powerful this gunpowder is. They were supplying. It's actually at the heart of the British Empire. They were supplying one. They were one of only 3 gunpowder works in Britain. I think one was in Cumbria.
One's near
one
me.
Was in Essex. Are you in Essex?
No, but the Royal Gunpowder Mills in Waltham Abbey. Actually, might be Essex.
Yeah.
Waltham Abbey, I think, is Essex. But yeah, I've been on a ghost hunt there, actually. Yeah.
All right. You probably have the same experiences there, then.
In actual fact, at the Royal Gunpowder Mills, I didn't really pick up that much. There wasn't a lot of activity happening, bizarrely, which is supposed to be quite
Maybe
haunted,
you should go into the woods. That's where all the bodies are, in the trees.
That's right. So yeah, they would store them in the pub until such times as the local vicar, I suppose, would come along and take them away for burial. And also by the pub, it's like a sort of perfect storm almost. You've got the gunpowder works, you've got the stream. Now, paranormal stuff you quite often find around water, won't you, as well?
Yeah,
so you've got the water, you've got gunpowder works, you've got a pub that held mangled bodies of people who didn't know they were going to die until boom, gone. You've got a railway line, the line from Reading to Gatwick Airport, runs right by the pub, sort of just opposite the pub. Like you could literally throw a stone to the line, and then just across the other side of that level crossing, I've found out in recent years from these other guys, but it's quite a common thing for people in this village. It's called Chilworth. If they're out and about in the early hours of the morning and they're driving around that area, to see these old mill workers, these gunpowder workers. I mean, they don't know they're mill workers when they first see them. They just see a group of guys walk. Now, there's a little lane opposite this pub. It's so awkward explaining things without pictures and stuff, but the other side of a railway line, there's a little lane that weaves its way up, winding up to a village called Blackheath. And people see these men in a group sort of just walking on, shuffling along the lane, and they slow down in their cars thinking, well, I know there's a group of guys there. They'll be round the corner. It's all winding, you see. So I'm going to slow down because I don't want to run these guys over because they're in the spotlights of the car. But when they get round the corner, there's nobody there. and there's nowhere they could go, you know. So this happens quite frequently. There's also talk of weird funnels of like steam or smoke coming from the ground. So these are all the bits that I learned after writing the book. So my book is focused on the history and my dad's story, whereas all these other things have come in later. You know, even though at the time when I tried to find all this stuff, I couldn't find anything. But it was also there's a paper in Guildford, the nearby town, called the Surrey Advertiser, and they did a feature on it as well. But there are a few books about the gunpowder works, but they're written by people who have no interest in the spooky side of it at all. You know, it's just history.
So when people's headlights shone on these figures, did they not see kind of like the type of clothes that they were wearing?
Yeah, they said they were like almost like bakers. They looked like bakers. So they had like the old-fashioned bakers. They had like baggy sort of smocks, baggy trousers.
It was madness.
Madness.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
What I'm intrigued with is that the headlights illuminated these figures that presumably aren't there.
Yeah.
How does the light bounce off them? You know, I mean, it's a weird one, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. But I mean, it does happen, doesn't it? I mean, spotlights pick out planes, don't they? That aren't there? You know, I've heard of ghost planes that are illuminated. You know. Yeah.
And this thing about that your dad saw with the faceless figure, I mean, this is actually quite a common thing. You know, some people do see a lot of these kind of like spooks with no faces or no eyes, like bizarre things where almost like glitches in I don't know what you'd call it, programming or the Matrix, where it creates the full body, but for some reason it misses out the face. Very bizarre.
Yeah. Sometimes the legs are missing, aren't they? Or the arms or whatever, you know.
Depends on what the level of the ground is that these historical ghosts are at. You know, like the Roman ghosts of York with Harry Martindale. You know, you couldn't see their legs until they reached where the Roman road was and their legs appeared.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that, you know, you talk about there's quite a few ghosts where they don't have faces. I remember the story on Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World back in the early 80s. And there was someone on there that spoke about the fact that their daughter, who was like 2 at the time, kept talking about the man with the towel over his head, kept coming into the room. And the mum didn't understand what she was on about. And then one day she said she was putting her daughter to bed. And then the daughter said, "Look, mum, there's the man with the towel over his head." And at the end of the bed was this ghostly monk figure, but he didn't have a face, she said. The mother said, didn't have a face. And she was absolutely terrified. She just ran out of the room. She left her poor kid there. And she ran across the road to the neighbour or something, you know.
Yeah.
Crikey.
I had you just reminded me of something that happened not to me, but to my brother when I was I don't know how old I was, probably about 14, and he was 7, and we slept on these bunk beds in this tiny bedroom. And he told me one morning, I mean, he's probably forgotten this now, but he told me one morning that this elderly lady walked into the room one night in the early hours. And she looked up at him. He was clearly awake, and she smiled at him. Then she looked down at the bottom bunk, and I was sleeping blissfully through all this. She smiled at me, and she looked back at him, and then she just walked out. And I said to him, I said, "Well, who was it?" He said, "I've got no idea. She's just an elderly lady." But we didn't have anyone staying with us. And I did wonder if that was one of my aunties. Who had, I think she died fairly recently, you know, so it may well have been her. But strange.
What I'm finding interesting about this gunpowder, and this is purely on the historical side of things, is that maybe where Andy is or where you were, is that any of that gunpowder may have actually been shipped up to London, which eventually was found in the gunpowder plot. So, you know, the gunpowder had to come from somewhere. So, you know,
exactly.
which was it shipped up to London and used by Guy Fawkes and his colleagues or something?
Yeah.
So interesting. So getting on to Cornwall, then obviously you ended up living in Cornwall many years later, and you started to investigate the ghost tales of Cornwall. And did you actually see any ghosts there yourself in Cornwall?
I've seen a few things. I mean,
Really?
over the years, I've seen quite a few things. I mean, we mentioned just now about the Faceless. Well, I've not seen Faceless. It's weird actually, because one of my well, I used to be a landscape gardener, and one of my customers was like very sensitive to seeing spirits and stuff. And he said to me one day, and we were just, I hadn't actually told him any of my experiences. And he said to me, he said, I always know when someone's not telling the truth. He said, if they say they've seen a ghost. And I said, well, how do you know? And he said, well, he said, if they start describing their face, he said, I know. And I said, well, how's that then? And he said, well, he said, they've never got faces. Now, that to me is not true at all, because I think there's everything. There's anything you can think of is out there. Now, I've seen full-bodied apparitions. I've had figures walk towards me who I just assumed were flesh and blood. You know, there is no fear. Usually I'll pick up on something like something weird about them. There's something, but only in retrospect. At the time, I'm just curious. But when they go past you, I always, if I'm sort of curious about it, I look around for whatever reason, and they're not there, and there's nowhere they could possibly go. But they were full-bodied, and they had faces. You know, they definitely had faces. So I don't buy into that. But maybe for him, that was his experience.
Yeah.
So,
I'd rather see a ghost with a face.
But I've also seen like what I called I think it was in my first book, I called it the sketchy man, because it was like an artist's drawing.
Yeah.
Where you could almost see the arms and legs. It was running. That, when I say that, technically it wasn't in Cornwall. It was actually on the border with Devon. It was actually in Devon, really. So I tell you that one. That was my eldest son was doing a gig in Barnstable. They had a music college there, and it was like a very, very windy night, and like really, really bad night. And I drove him up through, it's difficult, but from Bude on the North Cornish coast to Barnstable. But instead of going up the A39, the Atlantic Highway, which sort of hugs the coast, you can sort of go inland, and it sort of weaves in and out of these sort of forestry areas, but there's the occasional bit of high ground where there's like villages, you know. And we were coming back afterwards, and I had my son and my daughter. I can't remember which one. One was in the front, one was in the back. And we're just driving through this little village, and it was lit up, you know, with streetlights. And I saw this figure just run across the road, like ahead of me, like not in front of me, but like, I don't know, 100 yards or so in front of me, just really fast, like a flash. And it was like somebody running for their life. It was like they were running very, very fast. But it's difficult to explain this, but they ran. So if you imagine, I'm in the car, they're sort of 100 or plus ahead of me. They cross over. So it's a narrow road, two-way road, and they were lost to my vision when they went through something. It was either the wall or a fence, but I couldn't tell from where I'm sitting in the car at that point, right? So I'm curious about this, and I was, as I drove forward, I was looking to see where it might have gone, looking for an open gate, a footpath, a door that's open, anything, you know, because there was a cottage, but the cottage was roughly where the person crossed. So I'm doing these hand signals you can't see. So I figured that there must be a footpath or something, because there was this fence, like 6 foot tall wooden fence, panel fence, all the way down the left of me as I'm driving. And so I'm thinking there must be an opening, because that whoever it was went through something. It didn't stop. It just went gone. But there was no opening. There was no gate. And the door of this cottage, by the time I got there, like a few seconds later, the door was closed. There was a light on in the front room. It's like a little cottage with, you know, 1 up, 1 down, or whatever we call it. No, 2 up, 2 down, isn't it? So whatever it was, either went through the fence or it went through the wall. But if you imagine, they butt up to each other. But from my position, when I saw it, I couldn't tell. Does that make sense?
Did your kids see anything, or
no? That was the frustrating thing, because I said to, I think it was my daughter in the front and son in the back. One of them was awake but didn't see it, and the other one was asleep. Now the weird things about this is really weird. So I saw that and I thought nothing of it, because I see, well, you know, from talking to me before, I do see stuff and I hear stuff more than see it, to be honest. So to me, it wasn't that unusual. But a couple of weeks later, my same son, who was like rehearsing and playing in bands and stuff, have you heard of a place called Clovelly? It's on the North Devon coast, but it's just across the border.
Might have driven through it, perhaps.
Yeah, you wouldn't forget this place. It's like on the side of a cliff, and it's really, really sort of quaint. You know, it's got a little harbour, but you can't take your car down there. You have to leave your car at the top, and they've got like sledges to put food and stuff on to pull down.
Oh, crikey!
Yeah, it's like that. So anyway, it's a few miles into Devon from Cornwall, and I was driving up to this place, and they've got a village hall right at the top of the hill. So you got a cliff, and it's up this hill. Then you got the main road, and I had the family with me, except for him, because he was already there with his girlfriend and the band. They were rehearsing in this village hall. So this is like about 2 weeks later. So we're driving along, and we get a phone call from his girlfriend saying Dexter's had a bit of a shock. So we said, well, what's the problem? So she said, he's just seen a ghost. This was about a Sunday afternoon, about probably, I don't know, 6 o'clock or something. It wasn't, you know, it was just a normal sort of evening, just beginning to get dark. And I had to smile, because up to that point, he'd never experienced anything that I knew of, and he'd never talked about it. And I think he always felt that, oh yeah, Dad's telling his stories again, you know. But now he's seen something, so which amused me. So anyway, we get there, and I ask him, what did he see? And he was genuinely sort of quite shocked by what he'd seen, you know. And he said that this figure ran across the road, same as I'd seen, but in a different location. It was probably maybe 5 or 6 miles away. You know, it wasn't on the same road, but it was fairly near. And this figure just ran across the road and disappeared into the embankment the other side. And he said it was clearly like a young man, just and then gone. So it's just the weirdness of it.
Did it have a sketchy look to it, like the one you saw, where you could?
I think his was more of a filled sort of shape. You know, it was more real. Solid. It was like a real man. Yeah.
When you say sketchy, can you describe that a bit more? How would you mean by sketchy?
Yeah, like the classic example, I would say. Have you ever seen the? Because I last time I watched this, I thought, yeah, that's what it was like. Do you know the Aha video?
I know exactly what you mean.
Oh yeah, the drawings
like that. Yeah, like drawings, like really cool drawings. You know, I've always loved that video. It's just so cool. It was similar to that. It was like you could see muscle groups. Well, as I say, it's very, very quick. What I saw was very quick, but it was like when you watch people making cartoons, you know, like Walt Disney, and you see behind the scenes, and they're drawing like a rabbit or something, and then they're drawing it with a slight movement, and then another movement, and so on. They flick it together, and it's moving. It was like one of those drawings, so you could see like the muscle, I think on the leg and the arm, you could see it moving.
You got to wonder what the hell is going on with that, because I mean, it's kind of, if it's like a ghost or an entity or something, you know, presumably it would have some kind of form that is similar to us. So why is it presenting itself in a cartoon sketch?
I wonder whether it's because it's coming from another dimension around us.
Yeah, we're
not
literally
like you said earlier,
the whole
about
information, aren't you?
Yeah,
like a ghost
like
channel.
you said about the towel around the head. It's a similar sort of thing, maybe. Yeah, that's the only thing. But that's the only one I've ever seen that was not fully formed. The other things I've seen have been, I mean, I saw one in Northumberland because I lived up there for a while, and I was at a mine. Trying to think of the name of it. Oh dear, what was it called? Oh, my memory's gone. It was no, not Ashington. It might have been Ashington. No, it doesn't ring a bell. But it's north of Newcastle anyway. It'll come to me later. And they had an open day in the summer. Well, there were lots of them. And we had friends who lived up there. We still do. And they work for English Heritage, for heritage people. And yeah, the name's going to come back to me in a minute. Anyway, there's a couple of them. And the lady, Deborah, worked at this coal mine place, and it was a busy day, lots of people milling about, families, and this is when my kids were very young, and I'm walking along just through this open field, and there's like displays and things over on my left, and there's like a full-on mine. They've got all the old buildings there, and they've got history tours and stuff. They've even got, I think, an underground place where you can go down and they turn all the lights out and it's pitch black, you can't see your hand in front of your face. But I'm just walking along and I see this guy walking towards me, or towards all of us. And he's probably, I'm 6'1". He was probably around my height, maybe a little bit less, but he was bigger built. And he had like dark clothing on. Like he was a miner, you could tell he was a miner. My instant reaction was, what are they called? Role play people.
Reenactment.
Yeah. So I see him walking towards me, and I'm thinking, "That's amazing. You look the part." He was great. He had he had a jacket on. It was like loose, all sort of quite loose. It was very dark. Everything was dark. He looked like a real man, right? He was a real man, a manly man, And as he got close to me, and he's sort of looking at me, and I could see full on, I could see his face. I'm looking at him, and it's just that moment where you're curious about someone, and you're just looking at them. And the thing I remember was his face was covered in like black coal dust, and his eyes stood out. A bit like, how can I explain it? They stood out because of the blackness. So it was very sort of like the whites of his eyes, if you like. And I was so curious about this that I wanted to have another look. So as he went by, I turned around to have a look. No man. And there's nowhere he could have gone. And I wrote about this in my first book, because this has happened to me. I'm trying to think, it's happened at least twice. I think more than twice, actually. And I call them walk-bys, because that's how it appears to me. It's like they know. It's like they whatever it is, this intelligence targets somebody because they want to be seen. Now, my family did not see that man. I didn't say to them, "Oh, look at this man." I just assumed that they were looking. In fact, it would have even been quite rude to have said it, because he was quite close. So anyway, after I mentioned it, and they're like, "Well, we didn't see anything." So we went over later in the afternoon, we went over to see Deborah, who works for English Heritage. And I basically said to her, I saw one of your, I just played it like, "Well, I saw one of your reenactors earlier." And she's like, "Well, what reenactors? We haven't got any here today." So which sort of confirmed what I was thinking anyway. And I've had that happen in the place that this is all very confusing for listeners, but they worked for English Heritage. She had just been sort of promoted or sideways shunted to that place, but she had worked at Prudhoe Castle, which is where I lived for 10 years nearby. So I had access to that castle for like about 8 or 9 years. I could just go down there to see my mate, and I got to see parts of the castle that weren't open to the public. We went up on the battlements in the summer and enjoyed the view out with all the young ladies sunbathing. And I'm not ashamed to say, but it was a fun time. It was, and it was some of the places he took me were a little bit precarious for the steps, and I probably wouldn't do it now, with vertigo and stuff. But
what's interesting with this guy that you saw with the face is that there could have been a crossover with dimensions. So he appears as like an apparition to you, but I wonder if you were an apparition to him in his day. You know what I mean?
There is a story. I've heard a story about, I think it was in Australia, where a lady was in a car and she was driving towards these lights, no one else about, except for a car coming the other way, which was very old fashioned. And then the lights changed and she'd been looking at this car and she said that there was a lady in the car who looked really scared and she was panicky and they passed very slowly. And I think she spoke to her and said, "Are you okay?" And there was a conversation between them, and she'd said, "Yeah, I'm really confused. Where are we? Where are we?" And then she watched this car as it drove off, and gone. So again, in and out of different timelines or something. I don't know.
That's real. I mean, we're just coming up to the break here. It just reminds me of a story again with two people passing each other in the night in cars, and this was on the Michael Aspel TV show, which was I think the early '90s. Strange but true.
Yeah, that was cool.
And this was I think it was a security guard working on some industrial estate or something somewhere. And part of his job was at certain hours in the night, he'd have to drive around the estate or the works factory or wherever it was, checking everything. And it was a big place. So he'd have to go around, the little roads in a car. He said, as he drove around in his car, he said he saw a same sort of vehicle, the one that he was driving, coming towards him. He thought, oh, just like my vehicle. So as he got closer to it, there was a guy, he said, that bloke looks really weird. He looks just like me. And as he got past, he said, they both looked at each other and they were exactly the same person. So he said, I was looking back at myself, looking at me. Both with a state of wonderment on their faces. Yeah.
But they say if you meet your doppelganger, then you're going to die. So it'd be.
Yeah. Well, he obviously lived to tell the tale, So, interesting. But, that even goes one step beyond what we assume a ghost is,
Yeah.
Not many tales of those sorts of things, but I mean, maybe they are, but people just don't want to sort of say them because they feel stupid telling people.
Well, Neil, you're probably aware of my story of the driverless car in Stevenage.
Yeah, now remind listeners about that one. That was, you overtook it on the way to the cinema or something.
To this day, I have no explanation, and it sounds completely nuts. So get this. This was summertime. This was probably around about the year 2005-ish, quite a few years ago. Might have been before then. We'd go to Cineworld in Stevenage as a regular thing, me and about 4 other guys, just to see regular films that were on. So summertime, we're driving from Stone to Stevenage along a dual carriageway. We come across this car that's going very slowly, and we think, oh, come on, let's just overtake this. So we go into the right-hand lane, about to overtake. We look across, and I kid you not, there is no driver. There is no driver in the damn car. There's no passengers. There's nobody. And we're not just talking like a short person, not like a little
I just wondered that. Yeah, little old granny.
Or a dwarf or anything like that, because I was looking at the steering wheel, and bear in mind this was evening time, but it was summer, so it was light, you could see, and we were looking, and I just could not get my head around it. And I was in the back, there was a friend of mine in the front, and he said, "Did you just see?" And I said, "Yeah, there's nobody in that car." and we just overtook it and went straight to the cinema. What we should have done, if we could rewind time, is to follow it, or just find out what the hell is going on, because it really annoys me to this day that I have no clue what that's about.
The Invisible Man also going to the cinema.
Well, the only logical explanation would be some kind of prank TV show where they've got like a remote car, or it's been driven in some kind of way
people out.
To freak people. But we've never seen it on TV.
That sort of thing would not be allowed by the Highways and Byways Agency, would it?
This is it,
because it would distract drivers too much and presumably cause a crash.
This is it. I don't know how they could get away with it legally to do that.
Was it a current model?
It was just a normal car, just like I can't remember what colour it was.
It didn't look like a super modern one.
It wasn't vintage. It wasn't out of place. It was completely modern. It just looked like a normal car. It was daylight. We could see what was going on. There was nobody in that bloody car, and I can't get my head around.
We have mentioned this one. I'll say this one for the break. It's just for Mark's benefit, but other listeners may be familiar with this story. But it's one I heard on LBC radio going back about 30 plus years ago. I used to listen to LBC late at night. And they used to have Dan Damon. I don't know if he's still kicking about, but he used to do this thing, Dan Damon's Nightline, and phone-ins with your scary stories. And one guy rang in and he said that he was driving along a lonely stretch of road one night, no one around, apart from a car behind him, maybe 100 yards behind him, and maybe a car 50 meters in front of him. And they're all going down this long, lonely road, fields on either side. And they'd been following this car for maybe half an hour. And after a while, this car just trundles off the road and ends up in the field. And he thinks, shit, so he pulls over thinking the guy's had a heart attack. The car that's behind this guy pulls up as well. They both run into the field. He said it was a moonlit night, and it was where the field had been cut, cropped. There was, the grass was so low, it had just been cut, cropped. They both ran over to the car to see if the guy was okay, opened the door, and there was no one in there. And the other driver that was behind the guy was so freaked out, he just ran off and jumped his car and drove off somewhere. And he said there was nowhere that this guy could have gone anywhere, and yet the engine was still running as well,
That's just
insane.
It's just. Have you seen the footage of the American state trooper who's following this car? It's at night time, and this car is joyriding, obviously, and the car appears to pull left and go through a chain link fence.
I think I did see that.
But the cop gets out and he tries to push this fence. There's no way through this chain link fence, and the car just disappears. And there's not even a car. You can't even see the tail lights or the car speeding off. It just disappears. It's gone.
I wonder if they're this is a bit out there, but maybe their alien intelligence is masquerading as vehicles.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because could it be some kind of entities having a laugh? Imagine you're a very powerful entity that can kind of create holograms and create illusions and things like that. Wouldn't you come to a stupid species like humans and just have a bit of fun just to see what would happen? I probably would.
You could actually think it could be the military testing out, holographic technology, and so. They say, well, let's just try it on the general public.
They're supposed to be ahead of us by like 40 years or something, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I've got a little story for you on that. A friend of mine worked at I think it's Plessy Radar in Chertsey, doing sort of top. So he didn't have a fantastic job or anything. He wasn't like one of the boffins, but he was like running a small department where they did a small piece for a monitor screen. Well, that's what he thought he was doing, and another area would do something else for it. So he didn't really ever see the final piece. And one day he managed to, and I've got no reason not to believe him, but he eventually saw this huge TV, looked like TV to him, similar to what we have now, like I've got on my wall the other side of his camera, and he said that they were packing them up and sending them off to various sort of military establishments, like top secret sort of places. But now those TVs have only just come out in the last, 2 years or so. These big flat screen, I don't know, what is it, 2 or 3 years now, maybe. Because we had these big fat ones, didn't we, for years?
Yeah, big Cathay Road.
Yeah,
Cathay
Road, this was the 80s. And he always said, he actually died a few years ago, but he said that in the 80s he was working on these TV sets. So, so I think when they finished with the technology and they no longer have any purpose for it, they seed it out.
It's put out into the mainstream. Yeah,
I think so.
Right. On that note, ladies and gents, we'll take a break here on the Paranormal Peep Show. We're talking to Mark Anthony Wyatt, talking about ghosts of Cornwall and other spectral things. And maybe in part 2, we'll be talking about his UFO experiences as well. So join me, Andy and Mark, in a minute.
Today's the best day of my life. Woohoo! Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Hi, welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show. You're joining myself, Neil Geddes-Ward, Andy Chaplin, and our special guest, Mark Anthony Wyatt, who's been talking about ghosts of Cornwall and gunpowder and UFOs and driverless cars. So in part 2, I think we're going to resume with something to do with a surfer, Mark. Is that right?
It is. It is. This is one of the stories in my my book again. Hang on, just plug the book again. Where is it?
It's vanishing.
I think it's
If it's a
vanishing in
blue
front of my
book,
back screen.
It's blue screen.
Yeah,
Now.
that's
Yeah.
good.
For anyone
well,
that's
nice try.
listening, his books just vanish like a ghost.
Special effects.
Yeah.
Okay, so a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I was doing a lot of traveling back and forth between England and America. So it meant that my flat that I had in Cornwall, in fact, just if you look at the picture behind me, it's sort of somewhere over to my, trying to work it out, on my right, your left. It sort of is a place called Carbis Bay. And I had a nice little flat there. So I'd been thinking about earning a bit more money while I was away. And I thought, well, I could rent my flat out. So I went on Airbnb and I sort of tidied it up a bit, went on Airbnb, and I was able to get a lot of bookings for it. Now, the bad thing about that was that when I did come back, I had nowhere to live. So it wasn't so clever, and it was fully booked out. So I had to keep living with my, when I did come back to England for a few weeks at a time, I would have to live up in the southeast of England with my sister. It's because I couldn't come back to my home in Cornwall. So I had to find somewhere where I could live, just like a small temporary place, really. So I started looking around a place called Bude, where I had been living for a while. And to cut a long story short, somebody said to me, oh, I know where there's a place which their son was living at, and he was sort of running this place. And it was, so it's in Bude, it's in this little country lane just off the cliffs in North Cornwall. And it's I think about 1970s house, very bland, ugly sort of house, quite big. With, at the time, it had probably about 10 different people living there, and various partners would come and go all the time, and all the friends of all these people who they all knew each other, and they all had their own friendship groups. So all of these people would be constantly coming and going to this house. So I had a little room there, which I sort of rented on a short-term basis, so that when I couldn't live in my flat behind me, I could just go and live in this place a few miles up the road. And I knew a lot of people around there, so it was nice. All of the people who lived in this house were either surfers or they played rugby, because it's Cornwall and that's what everyone does, really. So, and they were all a lot younger than me, they're all half my age. So I was the old git there. And so I had this small room, and it had a lovely view, well, sort of a lovely view. I had a view across this caravan site, and then the cliffs, and then the sea beyond that. So it's like a beautiful view with these caravans spoiling it in the front. And it had nice balconies, so you could sit out in the sun and everything, But it was a very small room, and it had everything I needed. Now, what I didn't know was that a guy that had lived in this room before had died in this room, and he was a surfer, and he died very young. He died at the age of 45. Now, it's possible that I may have met him during the time I lived in that town, which was about 20 years, but I didn't knowingly meet him, although it's possible. But I knew everybody in the place I was living in all knew him, and some of those people were his best friends in life. Now, when I first moved in, this room that I took on was full of just all the stuff that nobody else wanted, old bits of furniture and surfboards and rugby kit, and it's just crap, really, just chucked in there. So I had to clean it up, decorate it, and then put my stuff in. So it's nice little, like a bed sit sort of thing, And I gradually, I'd never told any of these people that I was interested in the paranormal. None of them really knew me. I mean, I knew the guy that ran the place, I knew his parents, and I knew of him, but he wasn't a mate. He was like 30 years my junior or more, probably. But nice kids, mostly blokes, a couple of women, just really nice people, but party generation, just like constantly having parties every weekend, which was really, really awkward because like they didn't stop till like 5 or 6 in the morning, and I soon learned the best thing to do was to get out and sleep in my car on the beach and stuff, which is I did that a couple of times, but it was only now and again, so it didn't bother me. But gradually, even though they didn't know I was into this stuff and I was writing about this stuff with a special reference to Cornwall, which is where I was, they started asking me, have you seen Scatman yet? And that's Skatman, which was this guy's nickname. And I didn't know who he was. And they started telling me, well, he's the guy that you, well, they did, it all sort of came gradually. They told me, oh, he used to live in this house and he died. And sort of all of this information gradually came to me. But it turned out he'd been in my room, but they'd kept it. Well, the guy that let me have a room didn't want to tell me when I first moved in that, oh, Scatman died in your room. It turned out he actually died in my room. And but I sort of gradually worked out that this guy existed, that he lived in the house. And then I gradually worked out through people telling me at different times that he was actually in my room. And then finally I worked out that he died in my room. So it was like a process, really.
Did he die of overdose?
No, he died cancer. He had cancer.
Oh, bless him.
Yeah. And it's just such a weird story because I sort of, if I hadn't have gone to that place, I would never have known about this. I mean, it wasn't something that was known in the town, really. So I'm trying not to forget stuff because it won't make sense if I have to keep going back to stuff. But so different people would tell me different stories about him, and they would often sort of say, look, have you met him yet? And I said, well, no, I haven't. And my first thought when I first heard about him was, before they told me he died, was that he probably just moved off to Spain or France or Mexico or somewhere, because the community around North Cornwall in particular, the surfers, they travel all over the world. I mean, they literally go all over the world. And they stay in a place for a few months, then they move on, they come back, they earn a few quid working on tables or whatever they do, and then they go off again. That's their life, is surfing. So that's what my assumption was, he'd done that. And then I realised that, no, he wasn't around because he was dead, So different people, I was introduced to different people through my new housemates. They would say, well, you need to speak to so-and-so because it was his mate, and he will be able to tell you because he's had experiences where he's seen him. So I'll tell you a few of the things I was told, and they all sort of tallied with each other. And none of these people really, they sort of knew each other, but their friends didn't necessarily know each other, if you see what I mean. So it was like a big spider's web of people. So give you an example. One of the guys that was there, he lives in Portugal now. He and his girlfriend were both living in this house when I first moved in. Now the guy, within, I think it was a few weeks after this Scatman died, he was coming up this little lane. It's like a little country lane, typical Cornish lane with the high hedges on the side. And you have to go past this caravan site, holiday caravan site, before you get to this house that I was staying in. And I was there for well, I think it was about 6 months plus in the end. And this was the caravan site that I could see from my room. And as he was driving by, well, as he was driving up it late one night, he saw a guy on a bicycle, similar to my dad's story, actually. He saw a guy on a bicycle cycling ahead of him. Now, if you two both know Cornwall, I'm sure, you know what the lanes are like. They're tiny. And he's in a big, I think it was a Luton truck. So he's coming up behind him. He doesn't want to scare him. He doesn't want to knock him off. So he slows right down behind this bike, and he's watching this bike with a guy on it. And as he's getting closer, he realizes that he knows this guy. And of course, he's still sort of half asleep because he's late at night and he's not really thinking straight. As he goes by, this guy looks around at him and he realizes it's Scatman, his mate that died a few weeks or months, whatever it was, earlier. And of course, by the time he's realised it, he's passed him. So he checks his mirror. There's nobody on a bike. And this guy used to ride a bike all the time. So that was one example. Now, in exactly the same spot, I'm trying to think who it was now. Yeah, a bloke called JC. He, another surfer. I got put onto him because when they knew I was going to write about all this, they kept saying, "Oh, you need to speak to this person and that person." So he came around one day, and I never knew any of these people before, except for the son who sort of ran it. It wasn't his property, but he sort of run it. It was a weird situation. He was running it on behalf of a guy called Jesus. Well, that was his nickname. And when I eventually met him, I could see why. He had the long hair and the beard and stuff, and he just looked like that. And Jesus was running it on behalf of somebody else. It was like it was like a pyramid scheme of rentals, and it was all very, very highly illegal, really. And I think everyone was taking their cut on the way down.
12 disciples. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, but they were a lovely bunch of people, really nice people. But anyway, this other guy, he was walking home. This other guy was walking home. Same route, same place, quite near the house. You have to sort of, it's like a very, very tightly enclosed lane with overhanging trees. You know how they sort of like make a tunnel in the dark. And he was coming along. He heard somebody behind him on a bicycle. Now, he didn't know this other guy's story. He's just telling me what happened to him. So he's walking along. He hears something coming up behind him really, really quickly, a bike. Instinctively, he dives into the hedgerow. And if you can picture one of these hedge banks, it's Cornish banks. So he flattens himself against it and he looks round, expecting to see a bike go past him because he heard it behind him. There's no bike. But when he said that as he was laying there, sort of in shock, because he's heard this noise and then there's nothing there. In his mind, he saw Scatman, and Scatman was stood there laughing at him like he did it deliberately. And he said he hadn't been thinking about him before that moment. He had no reason to think about him, but that's what came to mind. So that was the two in the lane. Another guy worked at now this guy Scatman, this surfer, he had worked in a place called Life's a Beach, which is still there. It's a restaurant on the beach at Bude with a view over Summerlees Bay, Summerlees Beach Bay. And he'd worked there for a few years. He was a well-known character. You can go in there today and you'll see his surfboards on the wall, and it's got it's all signed by all his friends after he died. Now, I didn't know him at that time. Well, no, I don't know him at all. But that was all done totally separate. That was just a different thing. He worked there. Now, one of the guys I was put on to ask him about his experience, because everyone knew somebody who'd had an experience, either seeing him or feeling him around them or hearing his voice or whatever. There were bits and pieces I didn't put in the book, like I could have just gone on and on. There were quite a few people who'd had experiences. I just picked out the most interesting ones. This guy was, two of them, but two guys, I wish I could remember their names, but anyway, it's in the book. They were working on duty at this calf, and they finished, and one of them lived in a little annex type above the calf. It's on the beach, this place, modern building on the beach. So they decided they would go down and have a beer from the bar and sit in front of these huge windows and just look out over the beach. This is like late at night, sort of midnight, one-ish. And while they're in there, one of them had just come back, I think it's from India. And he was talking about his, how he'd found himself in India and all this stuff, with his spiritual angle. And then they started talking about their old friend, Scatman, who had died like a few months earlier, a year before, whatever it was. And as they started talking about him, they heard a cash machine in the calf suddenly went out, and I can't remember. I think it paid out or whatever. I know the lights came on. Anyway, I'd have to check. The lights came on, which shocked them because you would have to physically go over there and punch a key to get that effect, and no one was anywhere near it. It's just the two of them in there. So they had that experience. Another time, a whole group of surfers were in that same calf. This is all of this takes place within like less than a mile of it. You know, it's all in the same area. And they had been wandering around the town, and they'd been having a few well, cannabis, I suppose, and they had the munchies. So they wanted something. They needed something to eat, and one of them said, "Well, he was the cook, the chef, short order chef, whatever, at this calf." So he said, "Well, I've got the key." He said, "But if you come in and he cooked him a big breakfast. This is like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning." He said, "But if I do that, you've got to help me wash up and clean everything so that my boss doesn't know we've been here overnight." So they agreed, and they all had a big breakfast in the early hours. And while they were in there, they had these saloon doors like you have in Western, you know, like the spinning ones. And while they were in there, they kept opening and closing for no apparent reason. And I'm probably mixing up these stories, but one of these guys also actually saw Scatman walk through the calf and leave through the back door. So it's just like, it's a very modern ghost story. It's like surfers, you know, I mean, you don't get so many surfing ghost stories.
I think the icing on the cake would be if they turned on the radio and they heard bada bada bee ba ba bada ba.
Yeah.
He missed out on the munchies, though. He walked straight to the cafe and missed out the munchies.
Yeah.
Was his ghost seen quite a lot after that? Did it just stop after a while?
Now, this is interesting because, I mean, by the time I got there, all of those things had happened, but I was warned about it and sort of said, well, I remember when I'd only been there a few days, and two of these girls, Bryony and I can't remember the other girl, they both said to me, "Have you met him yet?" And I said, "Well," and I'd heard little bits and pieces. I said, "Well, no." And they said, "What?" They said, "Oh, don't worry, you will." And but I had an experience where I was in my room on my own one night, and they all went to the town. They all went for a beer, and they said to me, "Do you want to go?" And I said, No, you're all right, I'll stay here. And I sort of regretted it because the house went deathly quiet when they'd gone. So I couldn't hear the laughter and the, you know, from other rooms. It was just very quiet. And I felt that there was somebody hanging around my room because I was at the top of his stairs. And this went on, and the feeling just got stronger and stronger. And I'd been speaking to Janice, who's into all this stuff, my lady, and she said to me, "You know, you have to just speak to them as if they're there," because by this time I knew that I was in his room and all this. I sort of knew most of that stuff by now, and I just spoke to him like he was there. And I said to him, I said, "Well, you can come in if you like. You don't have to hang about outside. Just come in, but you know, don't scare me. Just come in." And you know, and I sort of said to him, you know, I hope you didn't mind me, because I redecorated the room because he had like all this sort of beach paraphernalia everywhere, like fishing floats, you know, surfboards and all sorts of stuff all over the wall. There was sand everywhere, you know, it was just, you could tell a surfer lived there. And after a while, this feeling just went. I just knew that whatever it was had gone. One night I was talking to Janice in America, and it was like very, very late at night, and I was just on my phone talking to her. And I mentioned Scatman. And as I mentioned him, because, you know, so many things had been happening, so I'd been getting so many stories which I was jotting down ready to put in the book. And there was a hell of a bang on the wall. It felt like the wall of a house shook, you know, like something really big, like a blast of air or something had hit it. And I said to her, I probably swore. I said, "Something just hit the wall." I said, something's crazy going on. So my son, who was at the place as well with his mate, He was downstairs playing PlayStation or something, very quietly, just playing away. And Janice said to me, did they hear it downstairs? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, but I'm going to go and find out. And literally, as she was telling me, I was already heading down the stairs. And I went down to the front room, and they looked up, and I said, did you feel that bang? And I can't swear on here, can I?
Only little words.
No, I won't swear, but I'll imply it. So they both looked up from their game and said, yeah, what the was it? And I was like, I don't know. I was hoping you'd know. So that was a weird one. But it was just after I mentioned his name.
That's interesting.
And the other thing I can remember was literally just after I moved into this place. One morning, we used to sort of like everyone would just do the washing up for everyone. If it was a bit, you'd do someone else's as well because they would do it for you. And I stood at this back kitchen window, just half asleep, really, just washing up a few bits, looking out the window. And the door over to my left, I hear the door open, the kitchen, and I hear somebody say, I can't remember what it was now. It's something like, just, all right, or something like that. There's another expression, I can't remember what it was now, which Cornish people tend to use. No, it's gone now. Yeah, was on. They go, what's on? Which is basically what's on. So whatever it was either was on or all right, one of the two. And I didn't look round, really. I sort of quickly went like that, saw a guy, and then just went, responded to him and just carried on, because I'd already learned that people come and go in this place. They come and go all the time, because there was like 10 plus people living there in different rooms who all had their own friends, and some of them cross-related, and others didn't. So it was a busy place. People would be coming and going all the time. So I didn't sort of look round and make a mental note of who he was, where he was going, didn't ask him any questions, because you don't. It was just open house, really. So I got a quick glimpse of this guy, went back to the washing up, and as far as I was aware, would have gone off behind me to the central staircase where my room was above it. And he would have gone up, I was thinking he was just a mate of somebody who's in one of the upstairs rooms, because he went that direction, And I never thought any more about it until all these stories started gathering, and the description of the guy that I saw was very similar to the guy, Scatman. He wore shorts everywhere, like board shorts, surfboard shorts. And he had this wild big hair, a bit like Robert Plant, that sort of look, sort of hippie-ish looking, and it was just like, I can't say for sure, but I think it probably was him, because he had this knack, as the girls told me, you will meet him, because he likes to know. He was basically what he was in life. He was somebody who just liked to be around people. And there is some footage. You can go on YouTube and you can see footage of him in his life. He was like this, obviously he was a surfer. He was on the BBC many years ago, doing a little piece to camera, talking about surfing. And he also did the thing where you go on the skateboard and you go downhill like really low, which is terrifying. I tried standing up on one and nearly broke my arm many years later. But so yeah, it's like I've probably forgotten some of the stories, but so many people had seen him.
Why was he called Scatman, though?
I don't know. I think it comes from some comic or film character.
Well, I mean, the reason I said earlier, the radio coming on and beep, bop, 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 the Scatman, the musician in the 90s, right? He
wasn't a musician. Don't think there was a link with the music, but I don't think I ever got to the bottom of why he was called Scatman. His real name is Simon.
Can you hear that?
It's like scat, it's jazz scat. Yeah, scatman.
Can you guys hear that? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any relation to that. I mean, scat has got two meanings. One of them's very rude, and one of them's I think kind of like urban. So the rude version is people who like to do sexual things with poo. So that's
no.
So that's the bad version.
Just because of a blue, will you? I put it in front of me.
I can see it vaguely. He's just disappeared a bit. It must be the light or something. I can see some shades on. Oh, he's just vanished again. That's it.
Yeah. Can you see that?
Yeah, guy with curly hair and shades.
That's actually him. That's I thought it was a drawing, but I found out later. Oh, that's the other side of the story. So bear in mind, I didn't know this guy. I didn't know him, and somebody gave me his brother's address. Bear in mind, this guy's died of cancer, like not 2012. It's fairly recent, and somebody gave me his brother's address because I wanted permission. Could I publish this? Because I didn't want to just publish it and upset him, or his mum or whatever. So, and I had all the witnesses. I said to them, "Do you want your real name or do you want a false name or whatever?" And then finally, I had to get the big one, which was his brother. Now, I didn't know his brother. It turned out, I think it was the guy that run the house said to me, well, he runs a motorcycle shop up in top of town on an industrial estate. So I sort of braced myself and I went up there, and he was quite busy actually. And I went over to him and I basically said to him, look, you don't know me, but I'm living in the house where your brother once lived. And he was he's a really nice guy, but like quite a tough guy, he was a racing motorcyclist, like motorbikes. So I had to sort of explain to him very delicately why I was there to speak to him. And I said, well, and how do you broach that to somebody like, oh, by the way, I'm writing a book about your brother's ghost. It's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is.
He was very open-minded. Now I explained to him. I said, all I can say is a lot of people have approached me, a lot of people you will know, and told me that they have seen him around the building, they've seen him around the town. And I said, I'm just writing the story. And I said, no, I don't. If you say to me you don't want it published, that's fine. I'm okay. But I just want you to know to give me that permission, because I'm not going to do it if you don't say yes. So he basically took it all on, and I gave him. I think I gave him some stuff, because by this time this house was being closed down as an illegal place to rent, really, because the guy who owned it at the top of that chain, he was not. I think it was something to do with council tax or something. So basically, everyone had to get out. Now, part of that involved clearing up like probably 40 plus years of old surfing equipment, because it had been used as a house for what do they call them? The surf lifeguards. And there's an adventure centre in Bude where they climb cliffs and these sheer walls and things on these ropes and stuff for kids. They train kids to do this stuff. So a lot of that stuff was in the house. It just been borrowed and left there. So my son and myself and a couple of other lads, we cleared the attic, and there was just so much stuff in it. And we were just giving it away because, there was too much stuff to be selfish. It's just like we were just saying, "No, do you want another surfboard? Yeah, there's one. Do you want this? Do you want there was everything there." And we found good homes for just about everything. And a lot of his stuff, this lad's stuff, was in the attic because when he died, they didn't know what to do with it. So it was sort of hanging in the attic because nobody wanted to have he had some really, really good gear, like, because he did a bit of mountaineering as well. He was like a real adventure guy. But it had been in the attic for too long. probably had, damp spores or something.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I found some stuff up there that was personal, like photographs of the guy, and books and things.
Show us again a photograph of him.
Yeah.
Because something I was about to say was there's two versions of the word scat. So there's the first version is kind of to do with poo and anything kind of like to do with excrement. But the other version of a dictionary is about fast rapping, usually of words that have no meaning. So what I'll do, I'll put in the chat box.
But not a musician, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I'll put in the chat box a picture of the Scatman. What sort of era was this?
He died at the age of 45
in 2012.
2012.
2012. Yeah. Okay, so I'll put a picture of the Scatman, the singer, the singer. Just put up the photo of the Scatman.
I'm trying to find it.
So he would have been in his early 20s, maybe.
No. Oh, well, when
all this rave stuff was going on, maybe.
Oh, maybe, yeah, you're ahead of me. Yeah, probably.
That's what I'm thinking is maybe there's a resemblance between him and the Scatman, as in the singer.
It's funny, I can't find the page now. It's here somewhere.
Must be going scatty.
Oh, I'm on the right one now. No, I'm not.
I mean, I can't see any other meanings. Oh, you found it. Right, let's have a look.
I wonder how I can get this to you without you getting that blue on it.
Tilt it around a bit.
Turn your filters on.
That's it. Oh, that's it. I can see it now.
I mean, okay, so he passed away when he was what, 45? Did you say?
45. Yeah. Can you see it?
To me, his face looks it looks a bit older than 45. He looks kind of quite ragged, quite rugged.
Yeah.
And he doesn't actually look that dissimilar. If you have a look at the Scatman that I've put in the chat box, if you had a moustache, he actually looks quite similar to the Scatman.
The other guy looks kind of Puerto Rican or something. The Scatman that you put in the chat box, Andy.
So I don't know if that's the link or not. So who I put in the chat box, that is the Scatman. The bee-bob-bub-bub-bub.
Yeah,
that is the Scatman. Right. That's him. His name's John.
Oh, okay.
Possibly that could be the link. I don't know.
I'm just opening the scat. It takes forever to come out. It hasn't come out yet. No, I'm not getting that yet. Oh, yep, it's coming on. No, I can't see it on there.
That's
hang on, I'll drag my finger down. Oh yeah, we're getting it. Oh yeah.
So if you take away the moustache, possibly.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Unless there's another reason that's completely.
Yeah, it's one thing I never really got around to finding out. Really.
I wonder if there's a Cornish word to do with scat, because Cornish, they have their own language.
Well, actually, he's I don't think. Yeah, it's not in the books, but I had a lot of his. It sort of ties into that stuff that I was collecting in the attic and stuff at the house to give to his brother. There were, in fact, all over Bude, you'll still see stickers. He was a real character. There's stickers made about him with Scatman, and I wish I could find them now, but I've got them, but they're on my other laptop. So it's almost like a sort of Batman type thing, more than a musician, I think, really. But people have that sticker, and there's even T-shirts. Local people wear local surfers. Younger people will wear a T-shirt with like Scatman. I can't remember. There's certain sort of in jokes with it. And
so
anyway, I'm sort of
his brother then. So did he read the material that you'd written?
Yeah. So what he said to me the first time I met him, he sort of went very quiet, and I can't remember the exact conversation. I mean, if I read the story again, I'd probably have more information on it. But he got quite emotional, sort of not blatant, if you know what I mean, but I could tell. And I sort of thought, oh, it's time I was gone from here. This was like a busy morning. He was just out in the yard with all his motorbikes, because he's they were sort of just outside on display. And I said, well, look, I'll leave it with you, and just. I think I left him my number or something. I said, just get back to me when you can. I said, there's no rush. And I gave him some photographs and that. So he's quite emotional, because literally I just arrived. This stranger had arrived, given him all these photographs and stuff, which he would never have got them. You know, I will take that credit out of that, if nothing else. If it were my son, really, if we hadn't have found those bits and pieces, he wouldn't have got, his brother wouldn't have had those keepsakes, because the other guys were, they just didn't think like that. They would have just binned them, you know. So, so anyway, he contacted me, but it was weeks afterwards. I mean, I thought, oh, I'm never going to be able to publish it because he hasn't come back to me and he's probably offended or something, you know. And eventually he said, I think he sent me an email, and he basically said, yeah, I've read through it. He said, I've given it to my mum. She's read it. And I think he had a sister. I can't remember now. Oh, and his best mate, one of his best mates. And that was the other funny thing. When bear in mind, I didn't know any of these people. So when I would say to somebody, oh, you know, so-and-so was his best mate and he told me this, they would say, he wasn't his best mate. I was his best mate. And they were serious. They all felt like they were his. So that says something about the bloke, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
But he made everyone feel he was their best mate. But yeah, he basically said to me, there's a few things that need to be changed, but then I'm okay with it. It was just like, I think there's something about a hat. Like he said, I never saw him wear a hat ever. He said, I'm his brother. And when I mentioned that to the other people, they said, he always had a hat on.
That's weird.
Yeah. So that was odd. But yeah, it was just an interesting situation to be in that spot, in the right place at the right time to get that information.
I presume then, if the place had to be cleared out and everyone had to go, there was no further reports of Scatman.
Well, this is what I'm quite interested in, because the house was completely emptied out and it was sold. The last I heard, it was still standing. And see, what we thought would happen was a builder would buy it, knock it down and build something nicer, because it wasn't a very nice house, really. It was very bland. It was quite big, but it was bland, you know. But it had a good atmosphere in it, good character to it. But I would like to know myself, and I'd like to know whether people still see him in the local lanes and stuff, you know, or in the cafe.
Well, anyone in the Cornwall area? Which town was it? Was it
Bude?
Bude in Cornwall.
Bude, yeah.
If anyone's heard of this Scatman story, please get in touch with us at the Paranormal Peep Show. We'd be interested to pass any stories on to Mark.
Could we go in a slightly different direction? Have you, because we're talking about Cornwall here, and we've got to, because we cover all sorts of paranormal stuff, we can't go without the show without mentioning the Morgor folklore. Have you got any Morgor stories?
There is a little bit in there. There's I'm trying to remember his name. There was a guy, what was his name? He lived in Falmouth for a while. He was in St Ives to start with, which is a piece behind me here. And then he moved over to Falmouth, and he was the one who came up with the first, I don't know, I want to say Mothman, but it wasn't a Mothman. It was what was the name of it? I can't remember now. I should have read through the book before it came on. It's so long since I wrote it. But two girls saw that moth creature in Falmouth, on the edge of Falmouth. Now the Mugwa, I don't know how you say it. That's how I always say it. The whole thing about that is MORG, that, like as in Morgan, that all ties into, well, you know, Neil, all ties into the mermaid thing, doesn't it? So the whole,
that's the name of my daughter, ironically. And she's well into mermaids. That's an irony.
So there was a lot of sightings off in Falmouth Bay, and this guy, I just can't remember his name now. He was publicizing a lot of these. He had a little, what we would call a fanzine, I suppose, which pre-fanzine days, which he was putting out, a little pamphlet, which I've actually got. I found it in an old bookshop, and he was conjuring up. He was a bit like a sort of fifth-rate Crowley. He was conjuring up these. I'll probably find it if I search long enough here, but he claimed that he could summon up these monsters in the sea. And he did little rituals with witches, but they weren't really witches; they were his daughters. So he was a showman, really.
Mm.
And yet somehow these things did happen when he was around. So it's like he was able to create his own reality almost, and by putting it out there. And he was involved with going up to Loch Ness as well, and he tried to raise Nessie. And I still can't think of his name. How embarrassing. Let me look through the chapter because it will remind me. I think it's in the second.
Was he a
one.
recent guy, like in the last 20 years or something?
70s, really.
70s.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, here we are. Yeah, the Wizard of the West. He called himself the Wizard of the West. Owl Man, not Mothman. Owl
Okay.
Man.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to think of. Yeah, because the chapter was the Owl Man, Mogwai, and the Wizard of the West. And see, I finished writing this a long time ago, so I'm a bit dusty on it.
I've never heard of the Mogwai. So it's only local to Cornwall, is it? This
Yeah, so it's basically it's Cornish folklore. It's apparently a sea serpent that inhabits the Falmouth Bay in Cornwall.
And his name was Anthony Doc Shields. Well, Doc was obviously his nickname, Doc. Anthony Shields. So he's called the Doc. He was the one that first came out with a story about the two teenage girls that saw it. And then after that, there were other sightings. This was 1976. And you were probably not around at that time. You're both a lot younger than me. But 76, there was a UFO flap. I can remember
that in Cornwall.
Well, just Britain generally. It just went crazy. And if you remember, we also had the heat wave.
Summer of 76. I remember it well.
Yeah, it was a red hot one, wasn't it?
Yeah, real scorcher.
Yeah. So all of that was going on. Dogs were acting weird and all sorts of stuff was going on in Cornwall. So it's all sort of connected. So you've got this Owl Man seen near this church near Falmouth in the countryside. It's like on tidal creeks, like estuaries, and then just off out in the sea, you've got these sightings of this, which is ongoing. I mean, it wasn't just back then; it's ongoing. And when he was accused of sort of making up these stories, like, "Oh no, you're just making it up," the thing was, even though he was a showman and he did exaggerate stuff and all of these things would have been around long before he was around anyway. I mean, there were stories of fishermen seeing these monsters, these sea monsters, before he was even around. So he would have grown, I don't think he was, he wasn't born there anyway. From what I've gathered from reading up on other stuff, he was in St. Ives, which is like, I suppose, 20 miles away from there on the other coast. He was there and he was part of the sort of artistic community, of which St. Ives is really, really famous for, and that's been my the thing that interests me the most is that the sort of art and culture of St. Ives in the past. You had, I mean, Crowley was down there as well. Crowley got involved in, it'd take ages to explain it all, but he was suspected of a murder, which, but it was a murder that wasn't. It wasn't really a murder anyway. It was like somebody dropped dead possibly from fright, and he was sort of tied into it. And I'm actually sort of working on that now because it's one of those real rare things that most people don't know about that side of Crowley, that he was there. But I found lots of evidence that he was there because he was in Newlyn and Penzance, which is just a few miles away. And he was involved in this place near Zena, which is the place I'm thinking of. So yeah, we had quite a lot of authors living around St. Ives. I don't know if you know, like Dennis Val Baker, Frank Baker, no relation. Oh dear, what's his name? I can't name. The names are all going. But there's quite a few people who wrote a story about that Crowley incident, all based on it. But they all changed the name. They all had different names. They changed the location away from Cornwall in one place. But they were feeding off of real life, like witchcraft and stuff that was going on.
Yeah.
They were channeling it into their fantasy world and creating these little novels, but those novels were based on real life.
Well, there is the Witchcraft Museum down in Cornwall, isn't there?
Yeah, that's in North. That's Boscastle.
Boscastle, that's right.
I have a sort of vague link with that because when I first moved there in, I think 99, 2000 time, I was working as a gardener in a little team, and we used to have to go out and cut large areas of grass with these big motor mowers. And I used to cut the grass outside the museum in Boscastle, where they had these sort of strips of beautifully manicured grass alongside the river. And it's when the flood came, you remember the big flood?
Yes, it flooded, that's right.
Yeah, the flood completely wiped it away. It took the topsoil and the grass, so it was gone. So, but that guy, the guy who ran the museum,
Graham?
I can't think of his name. Yeah, Graham. Graham, it was Graham.
I forget his surname.
King? Is it King?
Graham King, that's the guy. Yeah.
Well, Graham used to come out when I was cutting the grass. He used to come out. This was like early on a Thursday morning or something, about 8 o'clock. He'd come out and make me a cup of tea. So I think he's gone now. I think he's moved on.
Yeah. Lots
of
folklore associated with that, isn't there? Yeah. And a lot of it was washed away. And I know there was a kind of big rescue people. Lots of people went down there to volunteer to try and clear it up and stuff like that.
One of my mates, he lived on the coast at Bude, which is like probably, I don't know, 8 miles up the coast or something. Two of them, I was on the post doing the mail for a while, and they were chatting. This was when this flood was on, like the day after or 2 days after. They both saw cars out at sea, like sticking up like that, just moving up towards Bristol.
Oh, crikey.
Just bobbing, like that.
Wow.
I thought they would have sunk.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. they swear we saw it, yeah.
Could you bring your mic up a little bit? It's just...
sorry.
Just bring it up. That's it.
Is that better? Sorry.
That's a lot better now. Yeah, you're not so distant. That's great. So obviously you're associated. You've been involved in the UFO organization, which I did a talk at a couple of years ago.
That's right. Last time I saw you.
Yeah. So tell us about your UFO encounters, or if you've had any, or people that have seen them, or anything like that.
Yeah, I've not actually had any UFO encounters that I know of, put it like that. I've got a few in the books where people have seen very strange things. I mean, there's a lot of sightings on the beach at Bude. Again, they're all in the book, but they're not great stories, but they've seen stuff like a girl I know and a friend of hers were standing on the beach at Summerlees, the same beach where that surfer used to surf and where his ashes were spread at sea, actually. And they saw a craft come in very, very low to the sea, just above the sea, like a light. And it came in very, very fast and just came straight towards them and then stopped, I don't know, 30, 50 foot out or something, just stopped dead and then turned left and basically went shooting off towards GCHQ. GCHQ is on the cliffs at Morwenstow, which is slightly northeast, I suppose, of Bude. And it's an NSA, CIA facility, British government.
It's at Cheltenham, isn't it? GCHQ.
Yeah, no, that's the head office. And then they've got one at Bude.
Oh, I see.
The one at Bude's got massive satellite dishes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot about that in the book, I think it's in the second book, because a lot of people have had weird UFO experiences down the far west of Cornwall, around the Minack Theatre, where the Minack is?
Is that like amphitheatre thing?
Yes, yeah. So one of the experiences somebody gave me in the book, he was fishing on the beach, like beach casting. And he said, I'd have to go back and brush up on what he told me, but I think they went out on a boat or something, but they saw these lights over by the Minack, sort of hovering around by the Minack. And his brother, the two brothers, the brother who'd come down from up north said to him oh, that's a UFO. And he was just half joking. And I don't think it's stupid. Of course, it's not a UFO. It's whatever, something else. After that, we don't remember saying much at all because they woke up on the rocks.
Wow.
And the line was slack. And I can't remember whether they were in the boat or not. I'd have to check. But their lines were slack. The sea had gone out. They had fallen asleep on rocks.
Did they know if there was a missing time, like 3 hours had passed or something? Or
yeah, I don't think they knew whether there was any. No, I can't remember now. But yeah, they had that experience there, and there's been similar experiences all around that coast, going back for years. I mean, if you go back to the books in the 1970s and 80s by Michael Williams, he used to do a lot of Cornwall. You'll find similar stories. There's a story about where he told, he was a friend of mine. He's an elderly gentleman. He died about 2 years ago, and he did the forward for these books. And he said a gypsy lady who used to read fortunes and stuff at local fairs, she told him, again, it's like he said, she said, but this is just a story. So I just gathered everything and just put it out there, and you make what you want of it. But she said a lady came to her in a really bad way, basically saying that she'd lost her son, and her son had been out on a fishing boat. So I'm confused with his two stories, but he'd been out on a fishing boat with a mate, and his mate had come back without him and said that he'd fallen asleep on the boat. And when he woke up, his mate had gone. So two of them went out, one come back. And he swore blind it was nothing to do with him. Yeah, I don't know whether the police got involved. I'm assuming they did.
Because he would be a suspect for murder, I presume.
Well, yeah, number one.
Yeah.
So there's lots of it, but there's another angle to it which I looked into. So underneath Minack Theatre, which is an open air amphitheatre, as you say, the beach under that is called Porthcurno, and Porthcurno is where the cable went out to America, and it's also connected to GCHQ. So there's a fantastic documentary on YouTube, which I'm amazed that the government allow to stick out there, really. But it's a BT type engineer talking about it from a technical side of things. And he went all over the tip of Cornwall looking at the manhole covers, cast iron manhole covers with the numbers.
Yeah.
And he knows exactly because that's what he did for years. He knows what they mean. And, and he's taken aerial pictures with drones where they dig a tunnel or whatever, and bury the cable, whatever. And he's tracked down all sorts of weird stuff. And he showed the links between GCHQ in North Cornwall and the far west of Cornwall. So you're talking about 100 miles, roughly. So all the information that comes into Britain and out of Britain goes via GCHQ at Bude. Literally everything. Like what I'm saying to you now is going through there.
Wow.
Now, the other side of that is that all those cables are going underwater. Well, some of them are. I suppose it's all done by satellites and stuff as well. But the cables that go underwater, when there's a storm, sometimes they get exposed. And I've seen pictures of it when they're exposed. They've got this like metal sheathing around them to protect them. But they update them regularly, And I was wondering whether these cables might have some effect on people in the vicinity. Like do something to the frequencies and
a bit like microwave technology for the brain or something. Yeah.
So I sort of dug into all that. But my thing is, I dig into all this stuff, whatever it is, and I'll get a story from someone, and then I look into the background of it, the history, and then dig into a little bit of science or whatever, and then I just put it out there. But once I've written it and I move on to the next thing, it's like I've got like this filing cabinet. It's like deleted, next, and I've always been like, I can't carry it all.
So what's your next book? Have you got another book in the pipeline?
Yeah, I've got a few that I'm working on. I'm sort of looking into this Crowley thing. That's sort of on the back burner because I've you've I mean I'm sure you know, but when you start digging into this stuff, you might be looking just down one particular avenue and picking up that stuff, and then something else would come up, completely not connected. But there'd be a little nugget in it of somebody saying something which ties in, and then you start digging down that one, and then that brings you back to something else. And so I found things that verify. So there was a guy, again, his name's gone, but there was a guy, I've got his book somewhere. I thought I'd come up with this amazing expose on the Crowley and Cornwall story. I thought I was the first to sort of like dig into it, only to find out that this guy got there before me.
Oh no!
and I found and I was talking to a guy in a bookshop in Cornwall who specialises in Cornish books, and he said, "Oh yeah, so and so did a book about that. Here we go."
Oh no!
I'm like, "Oh no!" But it was useful really because he dug so deep into it. But I found stuff which fits into what he died actually. He died a few years ago. But I found stuff that he hadn't got to. You know, he just hadn't discovered it for whatever reason.
So you can sort of sequelize it, I suppose.
Yeah, so I'll probably just give him credit, but sort of say, well,
carry
I found
the torch.
Yeah. Well, it concerns the ability to make yourself invisible.
Right.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. So he used to have a party trick, Crowley, where he would say to people, and it's quite funny really, he'd say to people, well, I can make myself invisible. So, and he would I think one of the stories was he would and it sounds funny, and it is funny, but he would sort of go into a packed room and he felt that nobody could see him, but it's like maybe everyone else was in on it, and they're just, just pretend you can't see it, you know.
The elephant in the room.
I don't know. Yeah, but there are certain things that came up when I was digging into it that he did some really weird things. I mean, really strange things. I'd have to sort of gin up on it again because I've got scribbled notes everywhere which I'm going to get back into. But there was one lady, I think, who said that he suddenly appeared in her house and basically acted as if he couldn't see her, just wandered around and then just left. But he was supposed to be in London at the time and she was in Cornwall. But she says she definitely saw him. He was in the room.
Sounds like an astral version of him.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what we thought. We thought it's got to be something to do with astral. So we started digging into that, and we found there were other cases, and there were people working for British intelligence back in the 60s, I think it was, who were looking into all this stuff. And I know the Russians were as well.
Interesting.
So I think they're able to project themselves.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. All I know is that the stories sort of stack up.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to put them into some sort of logical order where I can convince myself, because I haven't convinced myself that it's real.
It sounds almost like what you say about the Russians. It's almost like getting into the espionage and their own sort of
psychic spies,
that sort of thing. Where maybe the Russians obviously looked into the history of Crowley to try and find out if he was onto anything, and then trying to re-tap into that information.
He was also working for the Germans and the British. In the First World War, he was in, I think it was New York, working to get the Germans on side. But supposedly he was with the British too, so I don't know. He's playing one off against the other, I suppose. So that's one thing I'm sort of delving into a little bit.
Where can people get your books if they want to know more?
Yeah, Amazon. I just go through and also if they're in Cornwall, which is unlikely, I suppose, but if they're in Cornwall, there's a place in Hale called the Cornish Bookworm. But Amazon. Hang on. This is really bad trying to show it on the screen.
Okay.
So, yeah,
The Spirit of Cornwall.
The Spirit of Cornwall, A
By
Haunted
Mark Anthony
Legacy. Yeah, volume 1 and 2. The first one is all about if you imagine Cornwall split into east and west.
Yeah.
This book covers everything from roughly halfway, like sort of St Austell, up towards the Devon border. And the other one is my end, the end I prefer, which is the bit behind me, the west, the far west. This is actually I don't know if you can see it on there, but that's
vanished.
You can't. It's disappeared. This would actually be on that picture behind me somewhere.
Okay.
But anyway, it's there's a lot in there. There's a lot to take in. It's there's UFO stuff, ghost stuff. There's a giant owl experience.
Okay.
There's lots of stuff in there.
Okay, I think we'll have to wrap this up now.
Okay.
We're reaching the end. So thank you very much indeed to Mark Anthony White for joining us to talk about the Spirit of Cornwall and other ghostly folk tales and UFO tales as well. Any final words, Andy?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. We'll have to Mark back on. I'll do a bit of shameless plugging for myself. If people could join the Paranormal Peep Show on Facebook, whilst we still can, because censorship is rife on all social media platforms at the moment, turning into East Germany. And also, if people want readings, Tuned In Events, Tuned In is also on Facebook for the moment. But we've also got a website, which I'm updating, tunedinevents.co.uk, and we're doing readings online. We've got a selection of fantastic readers, basically, including myself. Not that I'm fantastic, but I'm part of it. And just give us a message if anyone's wanting an online reading, because that is where it's going at the moment, because the psychic fairs and nights are just out. They're gone until this whole, crazy COVID situation has died down and hopefully gone. But we'll see.
How do you do it online?
Skype, basically. Yeah, Skype.
Yeah, no, I mean physically. How do you get impressions from people the other end of a screen? And
Yep. We found there's no difference, because what it is, you're connecting with the person's energy, and the voice link is very important as well. I mean, people have been doing kind of like telephone readings for decades now.
True.
Now. But Skype makes it even better, because you can see the person, and I've found you could still just as much tune into somebody on Skype as is kind of right in front of you.
I imagine.
Sorry,
I was just going to imagine these 0898 numbers or 0895 numbers, whichever of these ones are really expensive. They're probably almost a thing of the past now, because people can do it all on Skype.
Oh no, what they've done, they've simply gone with the times. So the 0809 numbers, they've now upgraded to doing web readings and Skype readings and stuff. Right. But we're cheaper. We're cheaper. There's something like £1.50 a minute, sometimes £2, £2.50 a minute. We're not. So yeah.
Well, put me down for one. We'll have a go.
Okay, we'll do that.
I'm curious about
that. Customer then. Great stuff. Okay. Well, thank you very much once again. Join us next time on the Paranormal Peep Show. Stay safe, everyone, and happy ghost hunting. Good night.
See you later.
Thank you. Good night.